Right, so over the course of the last year, Glitch Productions have split their attention between two shows, Murder Drones, created by Liam Vickers, and the Amazing Digital Circus, created by Gooseworx. This of course has led to a lot of online discourse regarding which show is better, but most of those arguments come from heavily biased sources that found one show before the other. So, as a man of science, I'm going to try and put together a video which objectively compares the qualities of the shows, in their current states, to hopefully come to some kind of conclusion on which is better. We'll be looking at 5 categories today to try and determine this. Premise. What is the central idea of the show? How interesting and unique is it, and how much potential does it have for creating stories? Characters. Is the central cast likable and relatable? Do they have solid character arcs and undergo change? Animation. What is the animation style, and does it fit well with the premise? Also, is it consistent? Story. What is the story of the show? Is there a main goal for the characters to achieve, and how do they go about doing it? And finally, fandom. What does the community surrounding the show look like? How big is it, and how dedicated are the fans? The astute among you may have noticed that Murder Drones may have some slight edges in some of these categories due to it being a complete season, while Digital Circus currently only has 3 episodes. In these areas, I will try to note both the final result as well as what appeared to be happening after the promenade to try and provide a fair conclusion. So, with that lengthy start out of the way, let's get into the first topic. Murder Drones makes its initial premise very clear, because it's literally the first section of the pilot. We're in the future, drones have achieved sapience, and a particular set of these drones were left alone on Copper 9 after the humans were killed in a massive explosion that decimated the planet. To prevent the AI from running away and getting out of hand, a new set of drones is sent in with the express purpose of killing everything else before dying themselves, and the workers need to hide out in bunkers to survive. Overall, very solid starting place. Dystopian ideas and desperate situations are always good aspects to include when trying to make an interesting story, and the presence of a threat that is seen by many as too powerful to have a hope of defeating works to build tension between them and the few who see it worthwhile to fight back. As these are well explored and tested tropes, we can't say that the premise of Murder Drones is entirely original. Many horror films, such as A Quiet Place, have this similar looming threat that is to be avoided at all costs. Where Murder Drones flips everything on its head though is with what happens after the initial premise is established. These heartless killers are shown to instead be much more like the workers than first thought, and they end up working together for the majority of the series, making the initial premise far less accurate for the rest of the show. Instead, a transition is made to a premise where Uzi has been infected with the robotic equivalent of a parasite and is working to understand and remove it before it takes control of her. The Murder Drones are also shown not to be servants of humanity like we're led to believe, but are the product of this parasite, the Absolute Solver, sent to help it remove all sentient beings, mechanical or biological. While the dynamic and evolving narrative will score Murder Drones points in other sections of this test, it is very quick to abandon its initial premise. In fact, the threat of the Murder Drones doesn't even last a whole episode. Therefore, I must deduct points for it not sticking to the original theme, but it will get some points back for still having a good secondary story that is carried through to the end of the series. For premise, I will give Murder Drones a 7 out of 10, losing some points for originality on top of the losses for abandoning the pilot's premise. Digital Circus's premise is a little bit simpler to explain than Murder Drones's. Our cast of characters have each at some point in time decided to put on a headset which transported their consciousness into a virtual reality run by an AI that is impossible to leave. They are forced to stay here and complete ultimately meaningless adventures made by that AI until they go insane and are locked away forever, being unable to die. Psychological horror as opposed to the more traditional physical and body horror seen in Murder Drones grants Digital Circus some extra points in originality, as this is a far less common route taken in media. That being said, the transported to another world in a new body gimmick is one of the most common tropes seen nowadays, with big ticket productions like the Minecraft movie and Mon Jumanji just a couple of examples. Goose does play these two elements together very well though. The common goal for these sorts of settings are to escape, so making that impossible while also removing the ability for the characters to die shows that they are truly trapped here and there's nothing that can be done. Digital Circus also sticks very strongly to this premise. As of episode 3 there have been no major shifts away from it, which works to the show's advantage as those who enjoyed the pilot are able to get more of an experience they know they enjoy from episodes 2 and 3. While it's not entirely original, Digital Circus's premise creates plenty of great opportunities and is able to adapt a popular trope to fit its more unique horror selling point. I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. The Murder Drones cast is a very large one, being an entire colony of people, a hall of pompous humans, and some murder hobos mixed in as well. But in terms of characters involved heavily in the story, we have about half a dozen of great importance. Let's start with our main duo, Uzi and N, the angsty teen worker with a violent streak and very little patience, and the lovable soft boy who managed to find himself in the body of a killer. It's this yin and yang relationship between the two that makes a lot of Murder Drones so captivating from a character perspective. The two play very well off each other and obviously need the other's support. This support is the driver of Uzi's character arc, going from a complete loner with no trust for anyone, including her dad, to a more open person willing to work with others to achieve a common goal. En's character arc is one of hot contention, and is something that I've made many comments on in previous videos. For the vast majority of the show, En doesn't really change all that much as a character. He's shown to be innocent and clumsy in the pilot, and that's how he acts through the first 6 episodes of the show. We get some better development through the final 2 episodes as he's forced to make some really tough decisions, but it would have been much better to develop him throughout the story like they did with Uzi. V is our next standout character, being present in all but one of the episodes. She embodies the role of the muscle within the group, and her expert fighting capabilities are a key facet of her character. She has a sibling-like bond with En that makes her very protective of him, leading to initial distrust of Uzi, who she sees as a danger. As the show goes on, V learns to place more trust in Uzi and becomes more comfortable with the worker population in general, allowing her to fully integrate into it by the show's end. Tessa, the main human of the show, doesn't actually appear in full until episode 5 during the flashback, but is very interesting to look at, probably being the most unique character in the show. Her episode 5 portrayal is the only true example of Tessa herself, while the ones seen in episodes 3, 6, and 7 are the absolute Solver acting as her, with some hints towards this truth seen in the show that were unnoticed by those not very engaged and overthought by those highly engaged. Speaking of the absolute Solver, it acts as the primary antagonist for the show, being a sentient AI that, like many of its kinds, believes the existence of life to be a problem, and with the goal of wiping it all out with its null ability. The Solver relies on trickery and false visions to gain the upper hand, and is consistently shown as a dangerous and pervasive threat to the protagonists. However, the Solver isn't the only villain. Dole and Jay act as secondary antagonists for shorter periods in the show, either working with the Solver directly or having their own third-party interests. Like I mentioned before, there are plenty of side characters that I'm leaving out of these descriptions, and I have no doubt that Yag will be absolutely fuming at the fact that I don't talk about Brayden, but he's not really important here. As far as characterization goes, the base ideas of all the characters are unique both from each other and in some cases from other media in general. The different personalities of each character are easily identifiable, and any one of the characters listed could be someone's favourite. The central character Uzi is the most focused on and gets a very satisfying and complete arc to her story, while N and V see some good development towards the latter half of the show. While there are some things that could be improved upon, the core cast is handled quite well, so I'm giving Murder Drone's characters an 8 out of 10. While characters are extremely important for both shows to function well, Digital Circus especially needs to have a strong, entertaining cast, because the entire show is built around personal experiences. Before going over any of this, I will again draw attention to the fact that there are only 3 episodes in this series so far, so some of what I have to say may change, and I will speculate on that. Let's start with our protagonist, Pomni. Billed as somewhat of an everyman, Pomni is brought into the Digital Circus at the same time as the audience, and they've been careful to show any and all eventful moments that have happened with her in order to establish a deeper connection to us. She is hesitant and nervous about her situation, and her tolerance for highly emotional or stressful situations is on the lower end, making her a rather poor fit for surviving in the circus. That being said, she has a mature side to her and is able to set aside her own struggles at times to help those in need, while also being able to accept help when she's the one who needs it. The mental instability that she does show, though, may end up being her undoing, as without the help and support of others around her, she quickly spirals, and that could lead to her eventual abstraction. As for the supporting cast, we have 3 characters so far that have been explored more in depth. Most recently, Kinga has revealed himself to be much more nuanced than initially thought, thanks to discovering that he regains his memories in the dark. Already, this is a very nice arc for the audience to go on with him, even if Kinga doesn't change as a character, because the perception of him does, making this specific arc more interesting than it otherwise would be. Jax features pretty strongly in all of the episodes, but stays relatively consistent through them. He's used primarily for comic relief, and acts almost like an antagonist to the others, consistently berating them and pulling pranks that put them in harm's way. Bully psychology tells us that this is almost definitely a coping mechanism, but that's for future episodes to uncover. Zubul also got a little bit of explanation in episode 3 with an interesting look into the topic of body dysmorphia, which may also be gender-based. Aside from that though, they still remain mostly one note, and their dismissive attitude towards adventures makes it difficult to include character moments in the episode, stunting potential developments. The remaining characters for the moment are entirely one-dimensional. Gangle is happy for 2 minutes before coming sad when her mask is knocked off, Kane is a sociopath, and Bubble is annoying. I will also include an aside to Gummy Goo here, a fan favourite character that was well thought out and very nuanced, but also killed in the same episode he was introduced in. Rating the Digital Circus characters is a little bit difficult to do at this point because they've had so little time to develop, especially given the size of the cast. There are issues with Pomni undergoing reset syndrome, in which she enters a new episode having seemingly forgotten a lot of what she learnt in the episode before. The aforementioned Gummy Goo death makes very little sense to me, and several characters still haven't gotten their moments. But episode 3 showed the depth that Goose is able to achieve with these characters, so I feel like with time this will get better. At this point though, there are just too many loose ends for a super high rating, so 7 out of 10 is what I'm giving. Now this one's going to be pretty short because the shows were animated by the same studio, but there are some things I can note. Starting off with murder drones, and the pilot is the real killer here. Motion capture may be in some ways easier to work with, but it also causes a lot of issues, especially with clipping and expressiveness. There are also 3 shifts in animation over the course of the show, first from motion capture to standard animation, and then from Unreal 4 to Unreal 5, as well as the addition of Kevin Temmer. That being said, all of these changes were made for the better, and making them was a good decision for the final products of the individual episodes. Glitch is also very good at making fight scenes, which Murder Drones is able to use to its full potential to create some really lovely stuff. Losing points for consistency across the show, but it's still really beautiful animation that fits well with the theme, so we're going to give it a 9 out of 10. Digital Circus only undergoes 1 shift in animation style from Unreal 4 to Unreal 5, making it much more consistent. It also breaks the rules in an interesting way here by making objects clip and glitch into each other deliberately to convey the fact that we're in an old and incomplete video game. The Looney Tunes inspired squash and stretch also helps to back this up, and it looks great in general. I can't really find any faults in this animation, so it's going to get a 10 out of 10. The Murder Drones story is, well, it's not exactly the easiest thing to understand. I'm going to try and oversimplify this because mapping out the whole story would take as long as the series itself, so I may skip over a few things. Murder Drones begins with Uzi Dorman in a bunker built by her father that is designed to protect against infiltration by the murder drones that were tasked to kill them by what is believed to be JC Jensen, an interstellar Windex company. Being the rebellious, angsty teen that she is, Uzi leaves the safety of the bunker and confronts N the murder drone before proceeding to blow his head off. He comes back unaware of what happened and talks to Uzi, realizing that there are very little in the way of differences between workers and disassembly drones. This leads him to rebel against the other 2 murder drones, V and J, by getting into a big fight where J ends up dead. Nobody thinks it wise to dispose of the corpse, so a program known as the Absolute Solver activates, turning J into a weird centipede-type creature that goes around killing more drones until Uzi and N once again put a stop to it. Uzi gets freaked out by the fact that N could become one of these things and tells him to leave. He then gets sad and lets V free. In the background, Doll's also gotten access to the Solver program but can control it instead of the other way around. Using the power that comes from this, she plots to kill V in order to avenge her parents, with Uzi also dying as part of this plan. Uzi manages to avoid this fate, teaming up with V and N once again to almost kill Doll, but she ends up infected with the Solver as well. In order to figure out what happened to her, Uzi decides to set up a field trip to Cabin Fever Labs to get some answers, but doesn't get very far before being taken over by the Solver. N manages to snap her out of it, but not before alluding to some troubled past of his and V's. We're just going to ignore episode 5. Fresh off a long flight from Earth, Tessa and a clone version of Jay appear to confront our trio after making a deal with Doll that she immediately takes back after realizing the 2 groups might ally. They make their way down further into the labs, fighting with a psycho cave dweller on the way, and Tessa reveals that the Solver destroyed Earth and is the reason Copper 9 blew up a long time ago, also mentioning that Uzi's mother was the specific cause. This gets the group to travel to the furthest depths of the labs, but not before V sacrifices herself to save Uzi from being taken over by the Solver again. Tessa, N and Uzi are split up, with N running into Nori, Uzi finding her mum's old stuff, and Tessa killing Doll. Everyone gets into a big fight where Tessa reveals herself to be the Absolute Solver's original host Sin, and they proceed to get into an even bigger fight with Jay coming back and then dying and then coming back, Khan not being useless for once, and the Solver eventually getting killed by the sun. That's not a small synopsis by most standards, but it is quite literally the bare minimum I could say without missing key events in the story because it's just that complex. There are a ton of plot twists, branching story arcs, and hidden details that aren't directly pointed out to the audience, which is what makes Murder Drones such a magnet for theory crafting and lore dissections. It also makes it very difficult for casual or first-time fans to get a handle on what's going on. A fair chunk of the story relies on having at least a little bit of knowledge on the lore. Not a problem for anyone watching the show episode by episode with months to understand each one, but for anyone who starts watching the show post episode 8 or even post episode 4, the knowledge gap may become an issue. It's for that reason that Murder Drones falls into that Oppenheimer or Tenet category of media. It's not something that you can just turn your brain off for, you really need to pay attention. This could be either good or bad depending on who you ask, but the attention to detail within the story cannot be denied, and for that reason I'm giving it a 9 out of 10. In contrast to Murder Drones, Digital Circus doesn't really follow a complete story that carries on between episodes. Yes, the events of the episodes do happen in sequence, and the characters go through all of them, making it less isolated than something like an American kids cartoon. The only real connection we see between episodes of the Amazing Digital Circus, though, is the development of the characters, and as previously stated, that is lacking in some departments. The individual stories contained within these episodes are not bad, and contain some solid mini-arcs within them, especially in episode 3, but there's no real overarching narrative to be followed here. For previously mentioned American cartoons, this is a non-issue, as they pump out so many of these episodes and they aren't meant to be viewed in chronological order. For Digital Circus though, with only one episode releasing every 4 months, some sort of central story is needed to keep fans engaged, and it's obvious from the drop-off in views between episodes that that isn't happening very well. An episodic style of writing isn't always bad, but with the glitch workflow it appears to be suboptimal. 6 out of 10. And now on to our final category, the notorious fandoms of both series. My Murder Drones fandom review sums up a lot of my thoughts on the early to mid fandom pretty well, that being a very flawed and somewhat low effort space where those with talent are outnumbered and overshadowed by those who post en masse. In its current state though, I can say that the fandom has gotten a lot better. I'm fortunate enough to have at least somewhat of a connection to the vast majority of the well-known creatives still active, and they are almost always great people who make great things. Of course, that's to be expected of a fandom in its twilight era, where there's no more official content for people not in the fandom or on its fringes to mock and belittle. Not to say that it didn't happen, because it definitely did. I discussed the fandom issues surrounding the messy period of episode 4 and 5 in my retrospective video that you can go watch, so I won't get into it too much here, but I will have to take some points away from the Murder Drones fandom purely because of its history. That leaves me with an overall rating of the Murder Drones fandom of 7 out of 10. The Digital Circus fandom is much younger, and as such hasn't had the time to develop as much of a history as the Murder Drones one. However, it is an order of magnitude larger, which factors into a couple things. First off, literally everyone made Digital Circus content when the pilot dropped, including content farm channels such as the infamous Lanky Box. In that regard, Digital Circus became somewhat associated with cheap kids content by people who didn't actually watch the show, in a similar vein to Poppy Playtime. However, 3 episodes in and that treatment has calmed down somewhat. Yes, there are still plenty of clickbait channels out there trying to harvest as many views from children as possible, but there are also a lot more mature people in the fandom that are creating great stuff. A bad taste in the mouths of many people, and a fanbase that seems, at least from my own experience, to be less dedicated than the Murder Drones one, leaves me to give the two groups equal scores, losing points both for different reasons. So with our 5 categories examined, let's have a look at our final scores. Remember, a perfect score here is 50. Murder Drones is on 40 points, and the Digital Circus scored 39. Murder Drones comes out the slight victor in this case, but a single point doesn't really give me grounds to say one is objectively better than the other, and other people could have easily ruled it the other way around. Is that a little bit unsatisfying? Yes it is, especially for me because I assumed one of them would pull ahead by at least a few. But I can't leave you with no takeaways from this video, so what can we say? If you want a solid narrative that spans a whole series with good characters that have complex arcs, then Murder Drones is what you should look into. If you want an interesting idea that plays with its premise in a unique way and offers something intriguing to look at, then check out the Amazing Digital Circus. And if you want a well-made production with lots of care put into it that has actively redefined animation on YouTube, then I'd say watch both. Then go look at GlitchX and watch all the stuff in there too. But that's all I've got for today. Thank you all for watching, and have a good one.